All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our May session of the 2020-2021 Learning Exchange Series. I'm your host, Kylie Clay. I'm the Associate Director of the Forest Carbon and Climate Program at Michigan State University. We're very pleased to host the Learning Exchange Series in partnership with the Forest Climate Working Group. The Forest Climate Working Group is a diverse group of forest interests with over 60 members, including landowners, industry actors, conservationists, academia, and those active with carbon markets. The group has worked together for more than a decade to advocate for state and federal policies that work to ensure sustainable forest use and prevention of land use change. For today's presentation, I'd like to introduce Debbie Reed, Executive Director at Ecosystem Services Market Consortium, and Stacy Cushenberry, Project Manager, also at Ecosystem Services Market Consortium. Their presentation, titled Ecosystem Services Markets Conceived and Designed for Agriculture, Scaling Impacts, will focus on how ecosystem services markets can work for the agricultural sector. This webinar will highlight what ecosystem services markets are and how they can incentivize agricultural producers to generate ecosystem outcomes demanded by consumers, corporations, and governments. We are very excited to begin today, but before we do, I'd like to briefly share a few details. To automatically receive registration details and information regarding upcoming webinars, please email forestc@msu.edu to join our mailing list. This session is being recorded and will be posted on the web along with any supplemental resources such as the presentation slides in the next week or so. If you've registered, you'll receive an email letting you know when and where to find those materials. Today's session will be followed by a Q&A. On the Zoom interface, you'll see the word chat with a little drop-down triangle next to it. Here, you can write your questions at any point during the presentation. We'll compile those questions throughout and then pose them to our speakers in the Q&A session following the presentations. If you're calling in but are able to email, you can send email, or you can email those questions to us directly at forestc@msu.edu. We'll aim to have around a 15-minute Q&A session, but in case there are outstanding questions, as there often are, we'll work with our speakers to have those addressed, and we'll put their responses together in a document to be shared alongside the presentation materials following the webinar. Attendees today are qualified to receive 1 CFE credit from SAF. This will be automatically communicated to SAF, and you will receive credit if you've registered with your information on your SAF account. If you have any questions about this, please reach out to us again at forestc@msu.edu. Attendees today are also qualified to receive 1 CEU credit from ISA, either in management, certified arborist, municipal specialist categories. If you'd like to receive ISA credits, please reach out to us at forestc@msu.edu, and we'll share the event code with you. So with that little bit of housekeeping behind us, Debbie and Stacy, will you please share your screen and begin today's presentation?
Mute off. All right, I'm getting there. Sorry. Let's see. Oh, I'm not showing how to do that. All right. Started at the beginning. How's that? So thank you, Kylie, for inviting us to participate. And is the screen okay? Can you see that?
You know, I was just going to say, we're actually seeing both slides.
Okay, let's do this. Does that work?
That's it. There you are.
All right, great. Thank you. So thanks for the invitation. I just want to say that in my last position, I ran a group called the Coalition on Agriculture Greenhouse Gases, and we did a lot of work side by side with the Forest Carbon Working Group, given that we were operating kind of in the same space. So it's nice to be back. We're at the Forest Carbon Working Group. I want to walk through with Stacy Cushenberry from my team, ESMC, and what we're doing in terms of markets, including ecosystem service markets for agriculture. We have a lot of slides. Hopefully you can just share the deck afterwards with all of your participants. So I'll start by just saying that we are a nonprofit, mission-driven, impact-oriented organization. And our theory of change is that we can utilize markets as a means of scaling beneficial outcomes from agriculture at scale. There's currently lots of demand for natural climate solutions from the agricultural and the forestry sector. So we see high demand, and we think that through markets, that's one of the mechanisms we can actually utilize to scale beneficial outcomes. As a nonprofit, what we're trying to do is really just invest in the space and provide the opportunities for farmers and ranchers in particular to be able to participate in existing markets, and then to bring together buyers and sellers and everyone in the agricultural supply chain together to work on these markets and ensuring that we can, in fact, generate credits that meet needs. Our mission started really with advancing soil health systems that benefit society, understanding that soil health systems are really the underlying function or support, if you will, for agricultural sector writ large, but we go above and beyond soil health systems. Right now, demand for improved soil carbon, particularly in soil carbon markets, is really a high signal that we're seeing, but we go above and beyond just the soil carbon and soil health. I will say that we tried to really re-engineer and conceive and design these markets for agriculture by really looking to overcome past market challenges. We recognize that to engage farmers and ranchers at scale in these markets, we have to be operating from the point of view of how farmers and ranchers operate and ensure that the markets can actually work with them in a way that meets their bottom lines as well as that of society. So we tried to rethink and design the market and include farmers and ranchers in building and testing the market to ensure that we can, in fact, achieve that. This slide really speaks to the due diligence that we've been doing to set up and launch a market. We started significantly investing in 2018 in the market design function, and a lot of the reports and assessments that we generated are available publicly on our website. So if you go there, you can see more. We formed a public-private partnership in 2019 to really build out the market once we had designed it and developed our protocols. And in 2020 and 2021, we've really been working on the program development and build out, and then expanding our opportunity set across the country as well as across major production agricultural systems in time to refine the program for a 2022 market launch. So we will be launching our market at the end of next year in the fall of 2022. This slide really just speaks to the public-private partnership. These are all members of ESMC and funders who are collectively contributing and investing in the infrastructure, the programmatic investments in a market that brings us from basically soup to nuts, one end of the market to the other, to ensure that we can actually generate credits and meet demand, but also meet the needs of farmers and ranchers. So you see everyone on here from large corporations in the food and beverage sector, but also all the major agricultural groups, corn, cattle, beef cattle, as well as wheat, and then some major land-grant universities, environmental NGOs, all just operating together to ensure that the entire approach works and meets existing market standards, but again, can generate enough supply and demand to be a viable functioning marketplace. In terms of our value to stakeholders, what we're really doing is investing in a national scale harmonized market program for agriculture. We hear a lot from both farmers and ranchers and others that there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of confusion in this space. Every program has their own opportunity set. So we're really working to ensure that whether you're a farmer or a buyer, whether you're in California or New York or the Deep South, the experience, the opportunities, the requirements are all the same. And so that it's not a new experience every time you participate. The other thing is that we are working on, we're a science-based, standards-based organization, and we're dedicated to transparency. And we're working with global certifiers to certify our program, our protocols, our credits as we go. We are also working on what I would call innovative protocols. So our protocols actually generate multiple assets that we stack and can sell as a bundled credit with multiple costs, if you will, for the various pieces, or we can disaggregate it and sell them to multiple buyers. So our protocols are innovative and modular. Modular in that we can add new assets or credits as time goes on and as we see a demand from the market. So for instance, we've started working on biodiversity credits given the demand we're seeing from some of our buyers. Our role really, again, is to be the agent of change to ensure that buyers who have established obligations and commitments to reduce their footprint from agriculture can meet their needs and meet those obligations, but also so that farmers and ranchers have the tools, the technologies, the opportunities to participate in a market in a way that we remove as much burden as possible from them. And then I also talked about our programmatic investments. One of the things we've done is to build this so that it's flexible. The standards for reporting in variable markets right now are changing, and we know that our program needs to change to meet those very changing standards as well. In terms of our market design, we do engage in both field and farm level accounting, but it's also incredibly important from the farmer and rancher perspective that data privacy is ensured. So we have very high policies for data privacy, policies and procedures. And in our market, the data, the credits are owned by farmers and ranchers. I think that's incredibly important because this is in fact a data economy that we're operating in. And what we're all after, what we are actually paying for, is the data that shows that changes on the ground can be captured, they can be quantified, they can be verified. And if we're selling that in a market, what we're really paying for is the data to show that those benefits exist. So again, we're data driven, but we really need to ensure that the data privacy of farmers and ranchers is protected in all cases. In terms of how we operate, when a farmer or rancher enrolls, we determine up front on the demand side, what is the desire for credit? So I talked to multiple stack credits we can generate. The credits we can generate include soil carbon credits, as well as reduced net greenhouse gas credits, improved water quality credits, water use conservation credits, and I spoke to the fact that we're planting biodiversity. When a farmer and rancher enrolls, we look at and we marry the projects to buyers. And so we know what the demand is and which market they will be operating in. And we just generate the credits that we know there is demand for. Our role, again, is we take on the work of protocol development, approval, certification. We take on all the work, and we've invested in quantification tools and technologies and a national scale platform, what we call our MRV platform. And then we work with global third-party certifiers, Gold Standard and Sustain Cert, to certify our protocols as well as our credits that we are selling. And then we pay the farmers and ranchers. The other thing is that when the farmer and rancher enrolls, they have one process they go through. We do multiple quantification behind the curtain, if you will, in our MRV platform. They have one experience. They include their data once. They don't have to do multiple processes to generate multiple credits. And that too is important to remove the burden from the farmers and ranchers. In terms of our asset quantification, I thought this would be of interest as well. So we utilize multiple quantification approaches, but models are basically the underpinnings of how we're doing this. So we're modeling on a field scale and working on multiple production systems, multiple conservation practices. And as we have built out our program, we are quantifying, we're calibrating and validating all of our tools at a regional basis, given that that is necessary for asset quantification with required levels of uncertainty. For our water quality assets, we generate total phosphorus, nitrogen, and sediment credits. And then for greenhouse gases, I spoke to this, Soil organic carbon tends to be of high interest right now, but we also quantify changes in methane, nitrous oxide, and then carbon dioxide from fuels and electricity, which can be utilized in some markets, but not in others on the land use side. For water quantity, we have one credit right now, but we're working on additional credits, particularly in the West. Anything west of the Rockies, there are actually functioning water quantity markets. But right now, our water credit is based on reduced withdrawals of water from natural water bodies for irrigation utilization. So if we can show reductions, you can generate a water quantity credit. In terms of our program, the major production systems and practices that we cover are shown on this slide. The point here is that we are systems-based. We are approaching this from a systems base and not a practice basis. The practices, however, determine both eligibility requirements to participate in the market, as well as our ability to quantify impacts that are typically tied to either practices or suites of practices, if you will. And then the other thing is we're operating in all major production systems that you see on the left. All of this is being done at the behest of our members and the demand of our members. So our program has grown out in response to their demand. For water quality, we're using the APEX tool, working with Texas A&M AgriLife, and also utilizing data from NRCS SEEP project, which has generated a lot of information for us to be able to calibrate and validate the tool. Both the greenhouse gas and water quality tools follow a field scale and daily time step. It's important if you're that in the weeds in terms of how we actually generate credits. And in every case, regardless of the market we're working in, we calculate both baseline and then project scenarios, and then do deductions based on uncertainty. So for whether it's for carbon or water assets, that is how we actually generate a credit. We are utilizing the Dndc model, which stands for denitrification decomposition. If you work in this space, you're probably very familiar with it. It's a globally well-known and globally utilized model. Also utilizes daily time step. The reason we chose this is because for soil carbon, we are doing both modeling and measurement. But given that nitrous oxide has huge opportunity sets in agriculture, and Dndc is perhaps the best known and best able to quantify nitrous oxide, we chose Dndc. And again, it has global applications. But speaking to how we operate, largely the same, how we generate credits, largely the same as for water. Look at the baseline scenario and then the project scenario, and create deductions based on uncertainty of your calculations. And then the last thing I'll say about the quantification, I spoke to this or just alluded to it. We both measure and model soil carbon, given that there's still so much uncertainty about soil carbon, not only at various geospatial scales, but in terms of depth of the soil profile where you see soil carbon changing. So we do require soil sampling at enrollment as well as every 5 years. And we are utilizing that both for calibrating and validating our models, but also for checking and doing true ups when we generate soil credits. These pictures, it shows a 3-inch Giddings soil probe on one of our projects at a ranch in Oklahoma. It does require specialized equipment. It does require specialized stratification and testing. So this tends to be very expensive. One of the things we're doing in our research consortium is investigating and assessing, including on our pilot projects, new tools and technologies to drop the cost of soil sampling over time. In terms of research efforts underway, I will turn it over to Stacy to pick up the ball here for a little while and get further in depth into some of our work on the ground.
Great, thank you, Debbie. So I'm going to take a deeper dive into what ESMC really looks like on the ground with our pilot projects. So ESMC is in the pilot phase of our program. So the pilots really are helping us test out the platforms, perfect the language around practices and enrollment, and determine how much data we need to collect. The current efforts underway include 10 research projects. As Debbie had mentioned, we're looking at soil sampling, the amounts, sensitivity, biodiversity, and our MRV technology. There's quite a few others included. We have 10 emerging markets that Debbie will highlight a little bit later in this presentation. And then we have the ESMC producer portal improvement. So this is our platform for collecting data from producers. And then we're also working to improve the training and materials. So this is really how the ESMC team articulates the trainings for pilot partners and producers on the ground. Then looking at the producer recruitment process for partners. For many of our partners, this is a process that involves meeting with producers on the ground, talking to them through the program, seeing if they will fit eligibility, doing some screening questions. So we conduct training for all of our pilot leads, so this can be a really smooth transition. Then we're looking at refining the program process, materials, and training. So part of this process involves vetting everything through our producer circle. And this is an ESMC committee made up of about 34 ranchers and farmers from across the United States that meet monthly to help inform the work that we are doing on the ground. Then we're developing contracts, agreements, and payment mechanisms that resonate with producers, making sure that we're securing their data. And then also the buyer recruitment. Go ahead, Debbie. So, excuse me, our pilots are currently located in 6 of the 12 US regions, and we're preparing to expand. So this map represents our pilots and the regions that we're using or that we're in, and it can range from 2 producers, such as we have in the Southern Great Plains, to several thousands of acres throughout our pilots. Go ahead. So the steps for starting a pilot and seeing it through to asset generation starts with determining the capacity in the specific geographical area. And this is based on a number of factors. So this can include regional interests. So there are partner organizations and stakeholders in the region that are able to work with us to develop the pilot. Are there resources for soil sampling? And currently we are creating pilots with our partner members. Is there buyer interest? So is there a buyer for the assets and credits that are generated? That also helps inform what scope 1, scope 3, what kind of avenues are going to go for are the producers and ranchers. And then producer interest. Is there an engaged group of farmers and ranchers who are able to be early adapters for the program? As we are developing, we're doing a pre-enrollment interview screening to help ensure the program meets the expectations of the producers. We don't want to have anything where producers are surprised by questions, timelines. We're working really diligently to make sure producers understand each step of the process. So once the producers are ready to enroll in the pilot program, we create a producer portal account. And this account is designed to help enter field level data, which I'll go over in a little bit. Afterwards, producers work with or without an advisor to identify a specific field for enrollment. So there's no minimum acreage, and producers don't need to enroll their entire property. Instead, they can select fields for enrollment. And then fields, once everything's enrolled, the fields are entered into the portal. Fields are then ready for the stratification and sampling. ESMC works with the pilot partners and soil samplers to ensure this process is done in a timely manner. And then for our 2021 pilots, producers or advisors need to enter data before the end of the calendar year, so by December 31st. And after that, the data is then certified and validated, and predicting that for our 2021 pilots, assets will be generated around the second quarter of 2022. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that we use with our pilot partners. Just to kind of talk a little bit about the activities that they can expect and to inform the producers. So this is cropland specific. We also have one for rangeland. So the cropland schedule is harvest to harvest, with the crediting period beginning at the previous year's harvest. So for our 2021 pilots, that's the start of, it's the start in the fall of 2020. Fields are first identified for enrollment, and then soil and stratification happens within the first 6 months. After harvest, the crediting period ends. So producers then enter their data, and then we go through the self-certification process, which simply means that producers did not enter data that was knowingly misleading or incorrect. And then we go through the verification and quantification. And again, as Debbie had said, that happens behind house. So you'll see on this document that the green is the producer responsibility, and then everything in black is the ESMC responsibility. So again, we're trying to reduce the burden on our farmers and ranchers. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot of our producer portal page. We conduct trainings with all of our pilot partners and enrollment specialists to help ensure producers and advisors are able to enter their data. As we are going into this 2021 pilot season, we're also sitting down with advisors just to kind of walk them through if they have specific questions. And additionally, the producer circle members work monthly to help perfect this platform since they are in the field. Next slide, please. And so we have also a number of different options for data collection outside of the producer portal. So ESMC works with a number of data collection platforms through APIs that allow us to import field level data with producers' permission, which allows them for reduced data entry burden. So that simply means that they sign up for a producer portal account, and then we work with them for whatever platform they may be using. We have quite a long list of platforms that we're using currently, or we talk to currently, and then we import that data onto ESMC's portal page so that they don't have to be entering every little bit of data. Next slide, please. And then our pilots are intended to be targeted, and since they are testing out the different components to the program, research is inevitable and warranted. On the research side, we are looking at the following, and this is within our scope 3. So we're looking at proposed modifications to soil sampling approaches. So currently we are doing about 27 samples per 80 acres, and we're working with our 2020 and 2021 pilots to do some sensitivity analysis to determine cost reduction and reduction in amount of sampling. And then reducing the overall data requirements for producers using remote sensing technology on cropland and grazing land. And then automation. So this includes the portal, the APIs associated with it, and streamlining our stratification and soil sampling process in AMP. I'll hand it back to Debbie. Thank you.
I'll mute myself. Thanks so much, Stacy. So in the previous map that you saw, Stacy indicated where we have built out our program and our projects. I would just say that our regions are built out using 2 data layers. One is USDA land resource regions, and the second is an overlay with major crop production zones. And that is how we generate each of our regional boundaries. And then all of our tools are calibrated and validated to each of these regional boundaries, which is important. That's how we've developed the program and are building it out. Where we have built it out to date is everywhere except the circled red area. We are building it out right now in that circled area. So it includes the Southeast as well as the Chesapeake Bay and Mid-Atlantic regions. And we'll be operational in all of the colored in regions by the end of this year, which is important because that's where any of our projects can be generated. I'm not sure when we will go into either the Western Range or New England, but we are doing market analyses for the Western Range, whole different set of issues there, but definitely something that we're looking into. So that covers the entire set of slides, and I'm happy I'll turn this off now so we can move to the question and answer period.
Okay. Great, thank you so much, Debbie and Stacy, for sharing your presentations with us. So with the remaining time, we'll move to the Q&A portion of the webinar. We've been monitoring the chat as well as the emails. We'll start with those questions first. Please remember to submit your questions either in the chat box or by email at forestc@msu.edu. It's not too late to submit them. So remember, we'll pass on any outstanding questions to the speakers after today's webinar. So feel free to keep those coming. So first, some questions, so we're sort of organizing them by theme here. Are there any types of agriculturalists you would say who are best served by or better able to take advantage of ecosystem service markets? For instance, in the forestry space, there are often additional hurdles or cost inefficiencies for smaller landowners. Do you see a similar thing happening in the agricultural space?
Yeah, that's one of the challenges of existing markets. And the way we do that is to aggregate smaller farms and ranches, if you will, into larger projects. And it's an important component. We've also been reaching out to underrepresented farmer and rancher groups, as well as those who have not traditionally participated in markets, so that we can ensure that we're getting better representation and better opportunities out to different groups, whether it's based on size, geography, production systems. I didn't mention that we're production system agnostic, so we can handle conventional, organic, and other systems, given that we're outcomes based, right? So we're focused on the outcomes, not how a farmer or rancher operates.
Have there been any interesting or sort of surprising barriers as you've reached out to different landowners that you maybe hadn't considered?
Yes, as a matter of fact, so we have a working group on inclusion and racial justice, and we have brought in some BIPOC members. And what we have found is that a lot of the practices that indigenous landowners engage in are not the same as what we have. And interestingly enough, a lot of them are, in fact, systems-based regenerative ag type practices that we're all now trying to revert back to. So that and non-traditional crops and more diverse cropping systems. So we're seeing really interesting things there that I think we really need to work through.
Thank you. So a question here about more specific projects. One person is wondering, where is your Central Atlantic pilot project located? There seems to be a lot of farm interest there. Also, related, when might you be willing to release more detail on the protocols and verification requirements? For example, regarding farm level baselines, frequency requirements for farm level sampling, interest in that in general, and also specifically how it contrasts with NORI, which is active in the Central Atlantic region, and how it also contrasts with Indigo Ag and Gradable, which are both coming to that area. Are those programs you're familiar with? Can you speak to the types of
lots of questions there. I'll try to take them in order. So we have been talking to EPA and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and the Chesapeake Bay Funders Network and lots of organizations in the Chesapeake Bay region for year and a half, maybe longer. And we're trying to right now resolve on a state within the Chesapeake Bay to start a pilot, given that there's so many different approaches and tools and technologies being utilized there. We are getting close, I would say, to operating potentially in one state, but we're not there yet. So it will be in one of the Bay regions, probably Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, et cetera. But we're getting close there. In terms of our protocols and our protocol requirements, et cetera, that we're literally on version, I think, 8.4, and we'll be releasing version 9 or 8.6, I think. So we generated our first protocols in 2018, these integrated modular tiered protocols, and have been testing them since then, working with both Gold Standard and Sustain Cert, and then all of our members. So we won't be releasing them outside of our membership until we actually launch and we're clear on what the protocols are, because they're changing, right? They're changing as we get feedback from members, from producers, and being refined. So that is when we'll be sharing them, and they'll go through a typical public comment period, et cetera. I can't tell you exactly how we contrast with NORI, Indigo Ag, Gradable, et cetera. I can tell you that we are standards-based and science-based, right? So we follow existing market standards. Both, we're familiar with Gradable and FBM because they are a member, and that is one of the opportunity sets that they have brought up, is bringing their platform and opportunities through our platform to actually generate credits. So there's some interesting overlays, I think, with existing groups like that.
So sticking with the methods questions here, how are credits, not including carbon credits, which I think more certainty there, but how are credits calculated given that each practice and outcome is in a different unit? For instance, what does one credit of reduced irrigation capture, one credit of water quality? Who decides what one credit is worth for these different activities?
Well, so the value of credits is actually for carbon credits. Those are typically global markets, right? They're not local markets. Water markets are very local. They're hyper local, as a matter of fact. So we have done intensive cost assessments of what each of the credits we generate currently sells for in various markets, and are committed to doing a couple of things. One is really being much more transparent than we see in a lot of current markets about how the pricing is set, number one. And number two, we are really working to figure out given that carbon markets are more global, right? Those pricing signals are much more common across the landscape. We're really trying to figure out within the different markets we work on, how do we actually price different credits in a way that is equitable? Because, for instance, in existing water markets, according to our assessment, the same nitrogen credit might go for literally cents on a dollar in some areas and hundreds of dollars in other areas because of resource constraints and pollution constraints, et cetera. So I will say it's going to continue to be variable. And various markets within the water quality space in particular also have different trade ratios, so that in some markets you have to generate 3 credits to be paid for 1. So I'm not sure we're going to soon bring harmony to those particular water markets. That will be a work in progress, but we're trying to be very, very transparent about how we're operating and what we see as the demand signals and the price signals from buyers.
Thank you. That's what a different, interesting space. How does that affect, is in your understanding, the landowner's decision making, right? That seems like a lot of uncertainty to be operating under.
Yeah, that's where I think it's really hardest, right? There's greater certainty with carbon, if you will, in terms of markets and demand and price signal. With water, it's highly variable. And I think it's just going to come down to how much demand is there, how much additional lift will be required by the producer, right, the farmer or the rancher, to generate a credit that might not have a huge signal. And is it linked to anything like a buy, a buyer saying, I need you to do this for me to continue to source from you. And we do see some of those constraints happening in this market. So it's a number of variables, not all of which we will be able to capture. We won't be able to capture the cost to a farmer or rancher of doing every practice, because that also is variable, right? All we can do is provide as much information as we can, and enable them to get additional information and technical assistance, right, from among our members or others. But what we can do and bring to that gunfight, if you will, is sometimes limited.
Sure. One question on remote sensing technology to reduce data requirements from producers. That was something you had mentioned in the presentation on one of the slides. Could you speak a little bit to the status of that technology? Does it exist? Is it too costly? What can we see with that?
So we are utilizing Optis, which was developed by Applied Geosolutions, now Diggin, now Regrow. And we really like that. It tracks both tillage and conservation tillage practices, as well as cover crops. And it can create data both at field scale, and there's a lot of available data sets in terms of data that's been generated at HUC 8 scales, publicly available on CTIC's website. I'm sure you're familiar with CTIC. But we really like that because it has the ability to both backcast and forecast and track changes in practices. And coupled with the Dndc model, we can actually improve quantification and really improve verification approaches with that satellite imagery. So it's really a fantastic tool and is enabling us to make to scale more cost effectively than we would be able to without it. I would say where it has been calibrated and validated to date is a limited region, but we are working with a group on a national scale calibration and validation of that tool, and the investments brought with that, number one. It currently only operates in cropping land systems. We are really looking to enable that to be also operation within grazing land, pasture land, and grassland systems as well, so that it can be a tool on livestock systems.
Okay, exciting stuff. Thank you. Can you discuss the soil sampling protocols? How you did talk a little bit about this, but how deep the soil samples are taken, how many samples per hectare? Do you have that information at your fingertips here?
Yeah, so we sampled the 30 centimeters, about 12 inches, which is like the global requirement for markets. We would love to sample deeper in deep-rooted systems, like particular grassland systems. And we think that we can where there is demand, and we will be able to track changes deeper into the layer. So for instance, the samples that we took in our first project in the Southern Great Plains, they were down to 60 centimeters. And the samples were stratified every 2 inches so that we could really track over time where you're seeing changes, particularly in those deep-rooted systems. Our current sampling approach is 27 samples per 80 acres, but that is like a thumbnail sketch. It's actually based on the stratification wherever you are, because stratification actually determines where you sample and how much sampling density is required for the level of accuracy that you're hitting. So the 27 samples per 80 acres is a thumbnail. It's variable. If you're working in a region like the Midwestern, Iowa, you will find much more heterogeneity of soil, homogeneous soil types across that region than you will in some other regions. So it might be slightly lower there. It might be higher in some regions where you find much more heterogeneity of soil types and things like slope, right, in different regions. So that's the thumbnail that we start with.
So some questions here on carbon credits, or I guess credits in general, but especially carbon. Soil organic carbon is one of the assets considered. How do you handle the question of permanence? Do your contracts have long time horizons in light of such concerns? And another question very similar is, does the soil carbon sequestered have to be maintained for a specific time in order to qualify for those credits?
Yep, so we are handling permanence on a 20-year time scale, and we will monitor for 20-year time scales. And I think that's currently where the markets are falling out as well, right? Particularly for these biological agroecosystems. Our contracts are 10-year contracts, and farmers can roll up to 2 10-year contracts. So that fits with that contract and enrollment timelines, if you will, for farmers and ranchers. And then again, we are quantifying, because we are both sampling and modeling. We're able to generate assets on an annual basis and do true ups at year 5, which is how we're approaching the soil carbon sampling. And then, following that, obviously, for 20 years.
So a follow to that question, how do you plan to reconcile credits when degenerative outcomes occur in farms, a decrease in soil organic carbon at one of your 5-year samplings?
Yeah, so, we know that will happen, right? Because soil carbon is highly variable and responsive to weather. You can have droughts, you can have floods, you can have all kinds of things. What we will do is be tracking that at an inventory basis or inventory level. Farmers and ranchers won't be penalized for reductions, right? Unless, of course, there's some tillage event or some deliberate instance that causes the losses. But otherwise, they just won't get paid if we don't see the carbon. And if, in fact, something goes down, I think where you pick up on the payments is once you get back to whatever the previous level was, right? So that you're not paying for the ups and downs, if you will. You're always paying for the ups.
So sort of on this same thinking, right? So this speaks to permanence, we also have the additionality and leakage are the other big themes we like to talk about, right? Can you speak to how this program addresses questions about additionality? I suppose tweak your methodology and then also leakage.
Yep. So, given that we're working with gold standard and sustained cert, we follow the requirements, those standards for additionality and leakage. We operate in two markets. One is sustainable supply chain reporting requirements, which is not a market, but we apply a market mechanism to that. And because the purposes of that market and the requirements are different, I won't speak to that. What I will speak to is the carbon offset market. So we do address both additionality and permanence. Additionality, we are utilizing a practice-based additionality requirement such that penetration of any given practice at 50% or higher is viewed as a non-additional, right? So business as usual, but below 50%, a practice is treated as additional within a given geography or region, right? So it's a practice-based penetration additionality requirement. For leakage, it's traditional market leakage, how you account for leakage, looking at yield and right places that leakage may occur.
Do you, when you have a landowner enrolled in a project here, do you require that you have a look at all of their land? Is that part of the?
Yeah, in the carbon offset space, right, which we refer to as scope 1, you actually have to do that to account for leakage, right, particularly within the farm, but you also need to look at it in terms of a regional basis as well.
So this actually ties to the additionality question. So several of the practices listed are similar to those growers are already being compensated for through FSA programs and I think other programs. Do you see growers being able to use the acres and practices in your program as well, or how do you think about additionality given that overlapping kind of incentives?
Yeah, so typically the market standards and the additionality requirement means you're only eligible if you haven't done it before or you haven't been doing it, right? So if you have not been doing a practice, including one that is an FSA supported practice, then you are deemed eligible, right, in terms of additionality requirements based on the additionality definition that I indicated. But again, we follow standards for additionality.
Okay. So do you plan on expanding your programming to include other registries such as CAR, ACR in the future?
So we could always work with another registry, right? The way we're operating right now with Gold Standard is literally at a programmatic scale. So we are working with them and on approval for our program, our protocols, and then our credits. And it works for us because they're able to see how our program was set up, how we operate, the due diligence that we're doing, right? We've been working side by side with them for quite a long time now, more than a couple of years. And so that process actually lends itself to us, our ability to scale our program so that when we make a change in the protocol, we don't have to go through the entire approval process for the protocol, right? If we make a change, we can make it with them and say, this is a change we're making and go through a more tailored approval process. We can always work with CAR, VERA, ACR. It would require, however, that we work with them on an existing protocol and or to get our protocol approved with them. So the reason we're operating the way we are right now is its efficiency, right? It's efficiencies of scale and the business relationship and the ability to really work with them and show them how we're operating so that they gain comfort over time.
Thank you. That makes sense. Yeah. On the other side of things, on the demand for these credits, how would you characterize the extent of corporate demand? Number of companies, existing commitments, any projections for growth in these newer types of markets?
Yep. So we commissioned a demand side analysis before we actually designed the market, and that's how we created our protocols based on that demand. This was completed in 2018, and it showed a $5.2 billion demand for carbon credits at that time from both the supply chain space and from the offset space, and a higher demand, about 7.8 from water credits. And it showed that the demand for water credits will be higher over time. We are seeing right now that the highest demand is for carbon, but water is really starting to pick up in both of the markets that we operate in, like the compliance and voluntary grade water, as well as the sustainable supply chain space. And all of our analyses continue to show that demand will only continue to go up. The one thing that I think, and we have, significant demand within our membership and external to that. Right now, we're operating within our membership, right? We get a lot of inquiries from others outside the food and beverage sector about, access to our credit. And so we know that there is high demand, and that will continue to go up. Since we completed that analysis, which is on our website, by the way, it shows $13.9 billion demand in 2018. Since we completed that, we know that the number of corporations who have taken on commitments to reduce their sustainability or supply chain footprint has increased 75%. And that continues to go up. So demand is like a high signal.
Yes, I think we're seeing that in all carbon offsets all over the place, and projected demand is going like crazy. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see how those projections play out with reality, and how all the corporate commitments, whether that actually transpires. It'll be an interesting future here. From a policy perspective, first, what role, if any, do you see the federal or state governments could play in bolstering ecosystem services markets?
I think that's
for governance here.
Yeah, I'll just speak to the federal level. States can do a lot. We work with a lot of states that have state programs that we're keying on. In terms of the federal government, I think there's already a lot of existing programs that USDA, for instance, has authorities that will enable these markets to scale, right, and enable producers to participate. So you already touched upon some of the conservation programs, which we view as a form of upfront financing, right, and an enabling environment, if you will, for producers to participate in the markets, kind of like a stepping stone. We also think data sharing, creating federal data repositories that can help to calibrate and validate all of the tools are highly beneficial. We started what's it called, Stacy? A calibration coalition to work on some of those national repositories for data, right, so that we can all share, including the federal government. I think there's just myriad opportunities here for us to work with both the federal and state and local government, and we're really just trying to tap that. But I think most of the opportunities are in research, are in enabling producers, right, to participate in markets where they only get paid at the back end, right? So upfront financing, upfront technical assistance in particular is highly necessary.
Thank you for that. So staying in the policy space for a second here, what do you see Europeans or other countries doing in this space? Anything we can learn from them or learn from other sectors that's worked, that hasn't worked?
Yeah, it's I could answer that a lot of ways. But what I will say is, what we see that is relevant is that Europe in particular, European countries are requiring some sort of like footprint analysis of the carbon and or the other ecosystem benefits associated with producing agricultural commodities as a requirement for purchasing, whether it's companies or the federal government. Like the Europeans have started to talk about carbon border adjustments, right, for including commodities coming in. We heard the Biden administration talk about potential carbon border adjustments. So I think that is going to be the most interesting space, is whether or not trading of agricultural credits and commodities will require that they be tracking the footprint of those commodities. And I fully anticipate that will start to happen, right? And so spaces like ours, market programs like ours, where we're doing that, I think will enable farmers and ranchers to meet those requirements. There are others that can do the same. I think some of the other interesting things that are happening is that the European government is investing in new programs to support climate smart agriculture, if you will, in their country. How that will play out, whether or not there are WTO, trade implications, I think are all things to watch. I think the bottom line, though, is that all of the agricultural communities and trade are going to start to be hyper related in terms of your ability to footprint your products. And, not necessarily the exact product, but, similar to the way these supply chain markets work is tracking it to certain supply sheds and certain commodities, right, in the footprint. I think that is just going to continue into the future. So watching that, participating within that, making sure that we're enabling the U.S. agricultural sector to meet whatever those requirements look like, particularly for exports, I think will be increasingly important.
So similarly international, but a different side of this, we have somebody asking who's very impressed by the program, is a farmer in Uganda working on projects to restore ecosystem services and biodiversity. Do you see this program as best served, this type of program best served in the US, or as you're saying, in Europe? Or is there a way for it to be extended to other countries such that, like, would they need their own, or that other countries can be part of your program, and how to be part of that?
It's a very good question. So, our program isn't necessarily unique to the United States, right? Because we are following like global standards, particularly for carbon. Will we be operating in other countries, right? We are already looking at working in Canada, have demand for North America. I think we're just really focused and making sure that we can get this up and running in the United States first and foremost, right? But the structure, the infrastructure, the framework, I think is in fact exportable. I will say though, in the United States, we're working in a data-rich environment, and working in a developing country is actually different. You have different resources, particularly different data resources at your disposal. I have been urging us all to think about like linking those two, but there are different data requirements and different things you can do. And so I think we have to acknowledge that up front and ensure that whatever systems we're building, they operate in both environments, and create enabling conditions that work in those different contexts, if you will.
Well, thank you so much for all of these like very thoughtful and detailed responses, and to all of you for your questions. We do have more questions, but in the interest of time, we'll have to get those to our speakers after today's webinar. But as I noted, we'll hope to get those up on the web alongside the presentation recording and slides, and not too far into the future. So we will get those questions asked. They've not gone into the void somewhere. So thank you so much for joining today. A special thank you to our guests, Debbie and Stacy. And you will hear from us shortly about the webinar going up online. And thank you again, Debbie, Stacy, for your time and expertise. And I hope you all have a great afternoon, evening. Where are we? Yeah.
Approaching evening.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Kylie.
Thank you.
All right. Regards. Bye.
Bye.